Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, yes.
Okay.
Yes, hello.
Good. Okay, so ta-ta, let me start by saying what I've done in the last hour. Really, I went through everything we've covered so far in terms of slides and things like that. And I've uploaded everything together with all the recordings I've had from the classes. So now you should have pretty much everything I have. So I've posted the link just a minute ago in the chat. Can you all see it? Yeah, so that link should take you to a general folder that has class materials plus recordings, two subfolders. So you should be able to see all the recordings and all the, the presentations and all that kind of stuff that we used so far. Do you all have access to that? Are you all comfortable with this?
I don't see the link. Probably I enter the conversation later. I don't know.
Okay, maybe that's true. Okay, so I'm going to post it now. That was probably...
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, okay, so I want to ask you all to, try to click on that link. Let's make sure that actually it works for you, because I know we've had various issues before with access rights. Is anybody who has trouble connecting to that? No? Good. Okay. So one thing from me to mention is that you will probably see that class number 8, if you go in the recordings, class number 8 is missing. So that is the class that we did on the 13th of October. It was essentially a week ago, the Wednesday class a week ago. The reason why that's missing is because we've run pretty much all of that class through with groups. So we had breakout groups, and we did pretty much all of that was conversational through the work you did in the groups and the feedback you gave in the class and so on. So I'd say keep that in mind, that class was never actually recorded. So I could not find any actual recording from that in the system, but I think it is because there was no recording. So other than that, I think every other class you probably have already access through that link, yeah? So that's that with the class. Now, with the recordings. Let's now think a little bit. Also in the class materials, you can see the coursework brief. And I would really like to encourage you to, as you make progress with your coursework, make sure that you go back to the coursework brief and you read again what is requested. Because quite often, you read it once in the beginning, and then you go on and you write your report. And because, you find various interesting things, you get a bit distracted and you do something slightly different sometimes than what is required by the actual coursework. So I want us to make sure that we, you do exactly what it is requested. So before you make, too much progress, make sure you consult again and again your coursework brief, because it has a lot of information of, how to do your coursework right and how to refine it and how to actually get a good mark. So please make sure you take a look at it, more than once while you're making progress. Other than that, I think I've emailed, I've responded to pretty much all of the emails I received from you. I hope I did. There might be, let me see, there might be a couple that are now pending. I know who they are. It's Ludovica. Okay, and the others you will hear from me as we go on today. So in terms of requests for our last class, like things to cover within our last class, I've had requests for, let me see, so it was for geothermal energy. I've had a request to talk a little bit about hydrogen. What else was it? I had a request which was a week ago. It was to talk about solar energy, but I think we've covered that now. I'm not particularly worried about that. But it's true that geothermal energy and hydrogen, we haven't talked about very much. And one of your colleagues also sent me a very good PDF document from The Economist, which was their analysis on the current energy crisis. And I thought that was really excellent. So thank you very much. It was Salvatore, wasn't it? So, Salvatore for sending me that. And what I've done was I have shared it with you in the class materials. So you will see there's an Economist article there. It's quite extensive, but I think it's a very good resource. And I have just started the recording. So have we got anything else that I'm missing in this process? So I will be talking to you today a little bit more about geothermal energy and about hydrogen, maybe about other forms of energy storage. But is there anything else, anything you always wanted to ask and you were too afraid to do so? As we can cover? No? Okay. If there is anything, you let me know as I go. Okay. So let me then begin. So I have a few slides for today, but I'd rather begin without slides. So what I want to be doing is to referring to resources that you might find useful in one way or another. So I will be producing a set of slides as we go. The story here is that for what you have asked me to talk about, I haven't got new slides. So I will be trying to keep some notes down as we go and refer you to the right places so you can, start understanding a little bit more on what's happening. And we will see how we can build that, okay? So let me begin probably with geothermal energy. So geothermal energy, those of you that have, is it a few of you working on geothermal energy? How many of you work on geothermal energy? Can I see a raise of hands? 1, 2, 3. Okay, not that many, only 3, okay. Okay, so does any one of you 3 want to say what is geothermal energy? In a few words and in whatever way you understand it, yeah? Don't worry too much. A very basic description. No? You're too shy? Oh, come on. Nobody? Okay,
yes? I can say something.
Who was that? Who was that? Rafael, go ahead, come on.
No, it's as I think of it is just energy or like that comes from the core of the earth, and it's beneath the soil. It's underground, and it can be used through, I don't know, like some pipes or some in general pumps, I would say, to heat places or produce in general energy.
Correct. So thank you, Rafael. There are a couple of thoughts here, yes? So let's try to consolidate a little bit and build on what Rafael has just said. So geothermal energy is basically a source of energy that comes in the form of heat, and it is energy that you can find deeper inside the soil. Now, there are many different types of geothermal energy, and I want us to go through them a little bit together so I can help you clarify a little bit what they are, because you will be finding geothermal energy in many different parts of the literature. and it is quite important to know what each part is. Yeah, all right. So let's go with the first one, which is kind of the more deeper geological thermal energy. So with this one, typically we need to drill at quite a significant depth. So we're looking for usually more than 100 meters, but we're going to go a lot more than 100 meters. And at those depths, we, depending on where we are in the world, yeah, normally we expect to find significant heat. So if I'm to say, first of all, in many parts of the world, if you were to drill at that kind of depth, the Earth's crust in there is usually a lot warmer than what the surface temperature is. And this warmth is coming, this heat energy is coming really from the melted core of the Earth. So the deeper you go, the warmer it is, typically. I mean, it depends on the structures, but as a very oversimplified rule, that is what happens. Now, in some parts of the Earth's crust, there are stored various fluids. So that can be liquids, that can be partly water contaminated with impurities and salts. Any of that, when they're exposed to these, significant heat loads, it can become steam. So quite often, if we are at the right place, if we were to drill all the way down there, and we try to give a way to that steam to come outside of the surface of the Earth, we have a good chance to be able to drill out steam of very high energy. Now, all of you have heard me saying that there is something called steam turbine. So a very typical use of geothermal energy is to run a steam turbine. So if we have the right geological field, yeah, it's not necessarily always the case that you have the right geological field, but if you have the right one that has what we call steam of very high enthalpy, that translates to steam of very high temperature and very high pressure, most of all, then that can travel all the way up to the Earth's crust with its own pressure, often, and be used after a little bit of a purification, because it's usually not very clean, can run a steam turbine. So that's a potential use. Yeah. So that's one type of geothermal energy. And there are many characteristics that we want there, but typically you're looking for a very high enthalpy field to do that. So you need very high temperatures and very, very high pressures. Otherwise, because you're usually quite deep there, your steam, by the time it comes up, it will be quite dead. It won't have enough pressure to really turn a steam turbine powerfully enough to produce any worthwhile electricity. But overall, that's the idea there. You will find more of that in places that have, very strong geothermal fields, like, for example, volcanic areas. So some of you might have seen, Iceland as being a country that has very strong volcanoes. Iceland produces, if I remember correctly, something like 2/3 of its electricity and heat, both of them, from geothermal energy. So Iceland is typically, always an example of a country that does quite well with geothermal energy. Now, let's not be, let's not exaggerate here. Iceland is a very particular kind of country. Yes, so it's a country that is basically full of volcanoes. I don't remember how many active volcanoes the country has. So there's no shortage of resource. Really, it's one of the most powerful resources in that country. It's really dangerous in a way. At the same time, it's a country with very low population density. So it's an island. It doesn't look big or anything. But I want you to realize that Iceland has a population of something like 250,000 people. So it's tiny. So again, it's not hugely difficult to cover their energy needs with geothermal energy. But the truth is, with all of these limitations, that they have really worked massively on these technologies, and they have really developed them in a very good level to make them reliable, to make them worthwhile of long-term investment, and having the capability to serve the country long-term. This is really a very important achievement that Iceland has made. So that's Iceland's story, and that's that type of geothermal energy that is of such a high enthalpy that you would use directly, for electricity production. Now, like I said earlier, there are many different types of geothermal energy. So if you're moving to other types of geothermal energy, these could be areas where you can have lower enthalpy, not necessarily ridiculously low, but still lower enthalpy that usually wouldn't be good enough to turn a steam turbine. So it could be steam or hot water, maybe at around 90 degrees, so nearly boiling temperature for hot water. Probably that would be a mixture with steam and hot water and other things, which you could be able to extract again up to the surface. This normally you would use in a heat exchanger, but anyway, what you try to do always is extract the heat. What you can't do with that is, of course, that kind of energy levels aren't good enough for electricity generation, so they're not high energy enough to be able to produce electricity, but they can be used for other things. Can you give me any examples? Do you have any thoughts on what you can do with that? What would you do if you had a nice source of 80, 90 degrees water? What could you do with it? It's free. It comes from underneath the earth, the earth crust. What can you do with this? There must be something you can do with it. Nobody? Hello? Is anybody here?
You could use it for like heating of houses.
Correct. For example, you can heat houses. So we can heat house. What else do we need to heat? Do you know? What are the things that we need to heat in this world? We heat houses, correct? So your radiators at home run at about 70 degrees, 80 sometimes, yeah? They can run lower, but they need that kind of water. What else? What else do we heat?
Roads. Like
what?
You can heat roads.
Roads? Tell me more.
Like you can melt the snow in winter.
Correct. Do they do that in some countries? I remember hearing about this, but it sounds, as a little bit of an alien concept to me.
In Germany,
No, they do that.
A lot.
So let me get this right. Does it mean that you have like underfloor heating on a road surface?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is this the idea? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Well, they did not build it for roads. Just they needed hot water to go from one place to the other, and they made the pipes go underneath the highway. This way, they get the double service. So you transfer hot water, and they heat the road in very cold places, so you don't get ice.
Okay.
Germany for sure. Germany for sure.
Okay. You see that now makes more sense to me, because I remember reading about it at some point, and I've immediately, I didn't search or did any study about it. I just remember reading it randomly, and I immediately discounted it. I thought that's stupid. There's nobody would run hot water pipes under a road to not freeze it. That's too much work, too expensive. There's no way that makes sense. But what you're saying now makes a lot more sense. Okay, so for those of you that missed this, that is situations where you need to transfer hot water from one place to another, and so you choose to do that, maybe not in the most efficient route, but you choose to do this underneath main roads. and that has the added benefit of not allowing any snow or any ice to form on these roads. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. You need to transfer hot water, for those of you who are a little bit, baffled here, because in many countries we have what is called district heating. District heating is a situation where you have, you have it at your house now. You have a boiler probably, and that boiler provides hot water for your radiators. Now imagine if you didn't have that boiler in your house, but that hot water was being produced centrally, somewhere close to your city, and it was produced at massive scale, and then distributed to your house and every house through a set of pipelines around the city. So that's the idea of district heating, that you produce somewhere centrally that hot water that then is being fed to your radiators at home. Sorry, say Ludwika?
Don't you have a lot of dissipation through this process? I mean, hot water, pipes, metal. I mean, the dissipation of heat. You have.
You mean the heat losses? You mean?
Yes.
Yeah. It is risky. So really, there are two different types of setups for this. One is, and I'd say one that makes more sense, is the one where you use waste heat from power stations to warm up a city nearby.
Okay, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't really care if you lose a little bit, because really that was already water that you would need to find a way to cool down somehow. So you then use that system and you drive that water in the city, and you can warm up a city. I mean, I wouldn't say for free, but a lot cheaper than otherwise. And there is a lot of that in northern countries in particular. That is quite popular, especially if you go towards Eastern Europe. It is even more popular. There's a lot of infrastructure for district heating. Now, that is one option, one scenario. But you also see in many parts of the world, you see dedicated thermal facilities which are only there to produce hot water, like central facilities, which are there to produce hot water only. So they don't produce electricity. So both things really happen. I mean, also in China, for example, Beijing had, up until recently, up until 4 or 5 years ago, they had 4 enormous coal-fired heating stations. So they were burning coal to produce hot water and then pipe that hot water to houses. There are 2 reasons why that might be happening. Yeah. So one, 2 reasons why you might have dedicated systems to produce that heating rather than having people doing it at home. So the first reason is resource availability. So what kind of fuels you might have available. So if you're a country that doesn't have natural gas or doesn't have oil, chances are you don't want to be having people burning, charcoal at home at every one individual house to warm up their house. It's a little bit of how should I say? It's a little bit of a nasty business, yeah. In terms of dirtiness, it's not a very good idea to burn charcoal in people's houses. A, because it will burn in a very dirty way. So normally it will produce crazy high emissions. So you want to avoid that. But also produce emissions. Yes, sorry.
What's charcoal?
Charcoal is coal.
Oh, okay.
It's a type of hard coal. That's all. So your main reason is that you will produce emissions both indoors and outdoors. Yeah. So there is no clean way to burn coal indoors. So almost always you will have emissions leakage indoors. So other than what you're doing outdoors, which is crazy air pollution that can cause major smoke events, and easily if there is a massive burning activity from all the houses, then probably it will choke the city. But even if that doesn't happen, indoors, you will also have significant emissions. So always there's a very high chance you will have many incidents of carbon monoxide poisoning, and such issues. So it's not it's very a recommended type of energy for each one individual household. It's a system which, if you see what I mean, you can control a lot better if you have one large burning facility, which can be equipped with filters, which can have proper engineering management, you can have proper maintenance. So there you can be a lot more safe in how the coal is being burned. It's not like, coal will never burn clean, but it's a lot better managed. So the emissions can be significantly lower if you're having one central unit versus having fireplaces in people's houses. And that justifies the losses that you have by distributing that water all over the city. There's another reason, which is very similar to what I've said already, and that is safety. So as a city planner, you don't want to have individual fireplaces in each one of the houses, because that means that it won't take too long until you have some major fires. Yeah, so it's a very typical thing in places that have run such systems, in the old cities really of Europe and other countries. Urban fires, there've been so many of them. And the main reason was, people trying to heat up their houses, typically with solid fuels, coal, sometimes wood, and they were, starting a fire, which would normally go on and burn their house and the next house, and if it was a big one, it could burn multiple houses. So that's another reason why you don't want to have people having their own fire. Now, I said before, that is typically a preferable solution for countries that do not have access or control of resources such as natural gas and oil. And that is really, these two resources you can burn in much cleaner types of boilers. Cleaner as in controllable. So these are boilers which you can very easily fume outside of the house, and you can keep the indoors air a lot cleaner. And also as fuels, they tend to burn cleaner generally. So in terms of emissions outside, it's not to say again that everything will be fine, particularly with oil, it's quite bad, but it's not as bad as coal can be. Natural gas is even better than oil. Again, I'm not suggesting that any fossil fuel burns clean. I want to be very clear about that. All fossil fuels produce emissions, different types of emissions, each one of them. But, the hierarchies, coal and wood are horrible. Oil is the next horrible. Natural gas is the one less horrible than the others. And ideally, you don't want to be burning anything if you can. So that's where it comes to central heating systems, to centralized heating systems. Now, let me plug this conversation of centralized heating systems to geothermal energy. So typically, again, with geothermal energy, if you want to warm up houses, you will need a district heating system, a centralized heating system. It doesn't make any sense, if you think about it in the first place, to have a huge geothermal well to warm up one house. Yeah, that's not exactly a good idea. It's not that cheap to run geothermal wells. I will get to something which is quite niche eventually when I move on from this point to show you that actually this is even happening, but it's a little bit more tricky. So what have we said so far for geothermal? Is we have geothermal, which is, let's say, high enthalpy geothermal for electricity. Then you have medium enthalpy geothermal for direct hot water uses. Yeah, so that's the second one that we've just covered. I asked you before, what kinds of heating do we need? And you said we need to heat houses, and that's very true. What else do we need to heat other than houses and roads that you said before, which was a very nice intervention? What else do we need to heat?
Water, maybe.
Well, water is the medium. Why do you need to heat water?
For example, I know that the geothermal started from these wellness and spa facilities that they
Good
had.
point. So yeah, you have lots of spas and wellness facilities, correct. Warm baths of various types. So typically, cities that have warm springs are the ones that host, that kind of recreation areas. So leisure and recreation is one thing. Of course, you want hot water for your house as well, for not just heating the house, but having a shower, for example, or I don't know, doing the dishes or whatever. You need any of that. We also use hot water quite a lot, keep that in mind, for industrial activities. So there is a lot going on in industrial activities, to dry things or to go through processes of, for example, heating a raw material to then mold it to something else and produce something from it and so on. So we have a lot of heat requirements in the industry, in various manufacturing industries and processing industries. So again, it is quite easy to imagine that if there is a geothermal potential of low enthalpy or medium enthalpy, you can do a lot with that. It wouldn't go wasted. Ludovica, yes.
I cannot imagine any industrial process which uses hot water. I mean, I can imagine using fire, but hot water, could you make like an example?
Yeah, of course. A typical one is drying stuff. So imagine, for example, let's say in the food industry, you collect certain foods, you then need to dry them to process them.
How can you dry it by water?
So you don't use the hot water on the fruit. What you do, imagine pipes of hot water going around, yeah, and you blow air through those pipes. The air that comes from the other side is very warm and is very dry because all of its humidity has evaporated through the contact of the hot pipes. Then that hot air you drive on for example, your fruits that you want to dry, your crops. And that is how you can produce, you can have a drying process. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Very similar processes we use for preparing coal for a power station. So coal, when you dig for it and you take out of the earth, in many places, I mean, depending on the quality of the coal, in many places you first need to wash it because it has lots of impurities. So you have to take it through a process of actually, you wash it with water, literally. So you wet it. Not only that, there are types of coal which are very low quality. I'm talking about some of the lowest quality lignites that come with a very high moisture content. So they can be almost, 50, 60, 70% water per weight. Yeah. When you dig for them, it's like mud. It doesn't look like charcoal as you think of it. It's not like your barbecue. It looks more like a muddy, substance. Again, that you first need to dry it before you put it, for example, in a power station to produce electricity. So again, that's the typical case where you would use a drying process. But it's not only that, really. Like I said before, if you have a free energy resource that can heat your materials to something like 60, 70 degrees, that's already a huge benefit. It will save you a lot of energy from a system that, for example, if you have raw materials that need to be warmed up, let's say to 300 degrees eventually. If you can do the first 30, 40 degrees for free, there's a significant energy benefit for your facility. It will mean lower costs. It doesn't mean you will stop at your 60, 70 degrees. You might want to, continue heating up your materials higher with, with another system, with a different system. So yeah, that's another way to think about it. That can be one step of the process. Now, there's another area, again, it's in the food industry, where we need hot water, and that is in certain types of greenhouses. So very often we use, as you know, I'm sure, greenhouses to produce lots of products for a longer season. And that's, all normal and nice. And it works quite well in places which are very sunny. So they can get already, within the greenhouse, can get pretty warm just because of the sun that is shining outside, even if it is actually a cold day. So inside the greenhouse, it can be relatively warm. Now, if you could run through that greenhouse hot water pipes, you could do a lot better. Yeah, so you could have the greenhouse operating through the coldest days of the year, or you could have those pipes running through the greenhouse, for example, at nighttime, where there might be a danger for the greenhouse to get too cold, for example. So imagine plants which during the day, because they're in the greenhouse, they can be experiencing an environment of, say, 20, 25 degrees, which sounds lovely, and they might grow nicely. But then a few hours later, during the night, the temperature, because it's winter, collapses inside the greenhouse, because greenhouses are not very well insulated, as you know. They're just usually just a thin glass or even a nylon sheet or something like that. Yeah. So then at nighttime, the temperature can fall to 0 degrees. So those same plants that have to survive from 25 to 0, for example, that can kill them quite easily. So at nighttime, you might need a way to heat that greenhouse. You don't need this to be a very warm process. If you have pipes that go through and they can heat the greenhouse, to something like 10 degrees, that's good enough. So again, that's another use where medium enthalpy geothermal energy can be used quite well.
So what we actually do is to create a giant radiator.
Yeah. This is used massively in greenhouses. Some of the more productive countries around the world do that quite a lot. I mean, you will see countries like, the Netherlands, for example, have crazy agricultural production. And you look at their weather and you try to imagine how that's even possible. You have to look a lot on what kind of engineering they have used to make that possible. And of course, heating systems is not the only thing they employ. They employ all sorts of very high-tech innovations. But finding ways to heat up the greenhouses is one of them. So that's that with let's say medium enthalpy geothermal energy. It's not the end of this, though. There is also low enthalpy geothermal energy. So that is where you can do other interesting things. Like, for example, have you heard of heat pumps? Do you know what heat pumps are?
I think yes.
Who can tell us a couple of words about heat pumps?
The one you install in the houses?
For example?
Is the one that collects the hot water, I think from photovoltaic. Well, that's what I saw. And then can heat the house, heat the water, heat the floors, something like this. I'm not quite sure. I've seen it, but I did not.
Okay. I think it might be a confused version of it. Does anybody know what it is? Because I think I need to clarify a fair amount of that. Does anybody know what heat pumps are?
Well, it's like AC, right? Air conditioning.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen air conditioning units, right? Yeah, like air conditioning systems. You've all have seen, surely.
Yeah, that it's just getting the air. I'd say cool air from outside to change it into warm air, for example, or the opposite.
So let's have a little bit of a think here. What air conditioners do, I mean, typically they're the split unit ones, which are, you have one unit outside and one unit inside. So outside you have the compressor, and inside you have the system that just, blows the hot or cold air, depending on, if it's summertime or wintertime, inside the house, the shop, whatever it is. Now, what the systems do, and I will not go into the mechanics of it because they're pretty crazy, but essentially they manage to absorb energy from the surrounding environment and use a lot of that energy to produce either cool or hot air. So essentially they're amplifying the own energy that you have. So it's not moving air in and out. Yeah. So in a hot summer day, for example, the outside unit, the compressor, can be finding coolness in an air of 40 degrees, and indoors it can be bringing you air of 20 degrees. And it does that not just by using electricity and cooling the air, but also by absorbing a degree of coolness from the hot air outside. So essentially it makes the hot air outside even hotter, if that makes any sense. Like I said, I don't want to go into the mechanics of this because they're quite crazy. Essentially, you have a medium that you need to be running through evaporation and compression cycles. But given that it is quite a complex cycle and none of you has an engineering degree, I would try to avoid that. So let's say it's like a black box. What heat pumps typically do is that they manage to find cold air in a fully hot day, and they absorb that energy and they manage it to come outside or inside, depending on how you want it to run. Yeah. So an air conditioner is a heat pump, and you mostly use air conditioners, where all of us have associated air conditioners mostly with cooling spaces. But in reality, you can use them also to heat spaces. The more extreme the temperatures go, the less efficient they are. So the colder you go outside, the more difficult it is for a heat pump to warm up your house. So they become less efficient. If it's, for example, if it's say 5 degrees outside, a heat pump can be perfectly good at heating a property. If it's minus 20, it starts being difficult. So the efficiency of the system, the efficiency of the cycle of the heat pump lowers quite substantially. It can still probably do it if you have the right equipment, but it's becoming a lot more challenging. So heat pumps then. Now heat pumps are quite interesting because there are two types of heat pumps. There are the air source heat pumps, which are the ones that you normally see, the ones that with the big external units that look like big fans. This is a compressor. So you have these units,